Happy Sunday, mentor teachers and instructional leaders and whoever else is watching this wonderful video update. Super excited for week 4. At the end of this week, we're halfway through, which is wild. But just want to appreciate all of you for all of the work that you did with our teachers in their first week with students. I know that your IL and SD shared this with y'all in your data meetings on Friday, but MTs, your people, love you. It's so clear that y'all are modeling relationships and foundations with them that they're taking and trying to apply to their students. And so just want you to know that we know how hard y'all are working and trying to get through all those cycles, and hopefully with our goals for this week, at the end of this week, everyone's going to feel a bit calmer and a bit more focused. So what is this week all about? This week's hashtag is hashtag be intentional. We know there are so many different changes and places that we could focus on with our core members, and heard from a lot of you that when you're in a classroom, you're like, I don't know what to focus on because there's this and there's that, and kids may be crazy, or maybe kids are bored, or where do I start? Going back to those foundational skills, as mentor teachers, we are going to be super intentional that we're supporting around those building blocks. For example, we have some pretty specific goals institute-wide around explicit directions and narration. A lot of teachers and folks commented, I don't know how to give a consequence. The thing of it is, though, is that we can't give consequences until we're giving clear directions, making sure that teachers are clear on that. While a lot of teachers are definitely scripting in those directions and they're trying to say them aloud, there's a bit of or pizzazz that's missing in that delivery. The way that we're going to change that is through explicit practice. So we need to make sure that the practice component of each cycle is not like a couple of minutes and it's not like a half-assed practice, but the person is standing up and acting like the teacher. Now that may mean that you need to step in to be vulnerable and demonstrate what that looks like, but we are seeing that there's this hesitancy in the execution of the skills that we're talking about, and the only way to change that is to build the muscle memory that goes with execution. And so that might mean that you want to have your IL or myself or SD or someone sit in that space with you to help make sure that there's practice happening. That may mean in an NT space, you're like to your group, hey, we're all leaning into practice this week. Like, what's been hard about practice so far? Because just talking about changing something isn't actually going to change it. They need to stand up and do the practice. And so that's really how we're going to focus in on those foundational skills. We want to make sure at the end of this week that classrooms are safe. And so in places where they're not safe now, we are stepping in, or the IL or SD are stepping in to model how to set up a lesson, to model a classroom reset, because we owe it to our students this summer to make sure that our classrooms are safe. It was a big question that a lot of folks asked me last week of like, when do I step in? When do I not step in? We trust your judgment, and you should trust that judgment too. If it's an unsafe or unproductive or destructive setting for students, then you should feel empowered to step in. You need to make sure in your conversations with CMs that they know that this might happen and why it might happen, and if that happens, like, what's their role in that? Because we do have a number of classrooms that are unsafe right now, and that needs to change within these first couple of days of this week. One, for the students, but two, so that we can reaffirm to the core members in those classrooms, hey, this set of students can be on task and be engaged with this content. Because we know as a staff that that's true, that all kids can do it if we're clear about what's happening. but we're starting to have some of those negative mindsets trickle up of, oh, this will be different with my students in the fall, or, oh, it's just a set of students. We want to hold a high bar for how we think about what's true for students in our classrooms. At the end of this week, all students are clear on goals and expectations for the classroom. So if I or you or whoever walked up to a student in a classroom and you said, hey, what would happen if you didn't follow this direction? A student will tell you, oh, we've moved through this consequence ladder, or oh, this happened. We're seeing teachers like being able to explain the purpose between those foundational skills. So unsurprisingly, the teachers that are executing them the most, when prompted, are able to say like, oh, I understand why directions are foundational to having students at the center. So they can't execute on something if they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. And the last big piece around the student-centered classroom is consistent. Right now, there are like systems that are half in place, half not in place. The teacher is kind of unclear, the students are kind of unclear. And so, of course, the system is not consistent. So so-and-so may be getting a consequence way more than someone else because we're not, like, what is the system? What are the baseline expectations? What do the rules look like in practice? You'll see in your actual update for this week that there are specific indicators that we're looking for around whether or not folks get there. So we want to see the number of CMs that have mastered directions and narration go up. Not to be alarmed with where these numbers are. It was the first week of teaching, and so if the numbers had been much higher, we would have been concerned that folks actually hadn't had them. We're seeing all of the components of explicit directions. And most importantly, we're seeing a decrease in the number of classrooms that are unsafe. A note on the Teacher Hub, a few questions from folks around when do I actually check off that box. So if I am Rebecca's coach and I click on the little pencil, if I observe her classroom and she doesn't actually have any of these mastered, I'm going to leave it blank. If she has mastered directions, then I'm going to go ahead and check that. Now, these skills, 9 times out of 10, are going to build on one another. So if someone's mastered consequences, but not the other ones, that's a little bit concerning, right? Because, like, how are they giving consequences if students aren't clear on the directions? And so just think really carefully about, like, which of these are practicing, because this is checking that box should mean, like, I feel super confident that whether I'm there or not there, Rebecca is going to be executing directions. Like, she's invested in them, students are following them, she's writing them into lessons, and so at every angle, they're doing that particular skill. A few other updates that just around the Teacher Hub. There's going to be another quick video for y'all and IL around Video Club, ironically. And just to make sure that you're all feeling clear, this week's session is super straightforward. For those of you that are doing that session this week, the bottom line of the Intro to Video Club is just like using videos is another tool or strategy that you can have in order to attempt your own cultivation and your own development, especially for those core members where you might be feeling like how they're experiencing the classroom is really different than how I and the students are experiencing the classroom. Being able to have those videos is like a helpful tool to be like, oh, wow, none of them were on task, right? And so with a lot of core members, seeing the data on those short cycle coaching notes is really helpful, but for some of them, they actually need to see the video of like, whoa, this is what's happening. Whoa, look at those misbehaviors. Or, whoa, this is a lot better than I thought it was. Look at the laughter there. Look at the students that are focused. And so that's going to be really important. A note about action planning this week. So this goal around focusing on the foundational skills and the indicators, you should look at your specific cohort to set goals based on those. So when you're writing your action plan, you're thinking through, like, who are my people who have and have not mastered skills? What's my goal for particular people by the end of this week? Who do I think I can move to a certain particular piece of growth, and who do I think I can't? Whose classrooms are unsafe, and like, what am I going to do on Monday and Tuesday alongside my IL or SD to make sure that those classrooms are safe? And so your priorities and how you're spending your time should be aligned to this idea of like zooming in and being intentional. In places where coaches and staff are feeling overwhelmed and unclear, core members are too, right? Like, there's so many things that we can be focusing on. And when we aren't clear on, like, this is the thing that we're focusing on, we're putting a stake in the ground. Yes, other things matter, and we're going to get to those other things, some of those other things this summer. But like, we know that these foundational skills are critical to success in the fall. And so we're modeling for core members what intentional growth and goal setting looks like. So we're looking at their goals from last week. We're bringing those into conversation. Like, if I was a coach, I'd take pictures. I'd go to the little goal wall and take pictures of my folks' goals, and then like pull up my phone, like when I'm in the conversation, I'm aligning my cycles to those so that folks are clear on, I don't need to be perfect at the end of week 4, but my goodness, I'm going to be better than I was at this foundational thing that's really important. I'm going to leave you with this quote to kind of help center you and ground you in what's happening. Change is inevitable. Growth is intentional. And so we are being intentional with our words, actions, thoughts, because that trickles down to all layers. And it's going to be just a really wonderful week for our students and for our kids. And I'm really excited to see how you all are in this second cycle or third cycle or fourth cycle of coaching with people. If you do have questions about any of this, feel free to add a comment into the week 4 MT update, or Slack it to the channel. Want to make sure that we're building that culture of transparency so all folks are getting questions answered. Change is inevitable. Growth is intentional. Have an awesome week 4, everybody.